right, Shalom. Let me get straight into this lesson. Got a lot to get to. So, who the hell is Leonardo da Vinci? You know, it's like a lot of you brothers and your sisters probably never heard of this guy. And again, it's like a whole slew of these Renaissance painters that gave you the modern visuals that you see today in modern day Christianity, which has molded your mind of how you see the Bible. How you see the Bible. Salakia. So, who is this devil? And what has he done? It says Leonardo da Vinci was an Italian ploughman of the High Renaissance who excelled in many fields, including painting. Right, so he was a painter among other things as well. So what did he do? What did he paint? Right here, you got this in 1498. Right, it says the Last Supper is a mural painting by the Italian High Renaissance artist Leonardo da Vinci, dated to 1945 through 1498. Salakia. And we're going to analyze this picture right here. Give me 1 second. So he actually painted this as well. It says Salvatore Mundi. It says Salvatore, which means Savior, Mundi, which translates to Savior of the world in Latin, is a oil painting on walnut wood attributed to Leonardo da Vinci. Look what he drew. Look at this. Look at this. Look like a woman. Right, Cesare Borgia. They was actually lovers. So let's get more into this. So he has totally, along with these other painters, have totally brainwashed you, and you don't know about any of this history. Jake is in a stupor. So I'm gonna go back into that Last Supper painting. I'm gonna break that down, right? That fake so-called Last Supper. I'm gonna break it all down to you. And matter of fact, let's do this. I'm gonna show you this real quick. So this is the painting that the devil painted, and many other paintings that you don't know nothing about this history. Right here. So this is the painting that Edomite painted, and this is the imagery that's been sprinkled in your family, your big mama house, your church institutions. This is the imagery they gave you as the Messiah and the disciples. This has all been whitewashed. And I'm going to show you something. This Cesare Borgia right here in the middle, the Borgia family. I'm going to show you something. So if you got any kind of sense that, all the disciples were men, and so-called black men at that, you didn't know that. But I'm going to show you all these Edomites in this picture, right? Look at this. They got beards on their face besides this right here. The one, if you're looking straight up at this portrait to the left of Cesare Borgia, that's a woman. None of the disciples were women, so to go to show you that this is a forgery. Leonardo da Vinci was a devil, Edomite, and he painted this picture to cause the deception. And you're going to see another, they got beards on their face. And you see another woman in this red cloak right here that's leaning in over this other guy with the brownish garment on. All of them look like homosexuals, right? So this is the imagery they gave you as a savior. This is nothing but a lie. So let's get into it. I wanted to show you this so that this can make sense. It says right here. So I put in Chat GPT about this image that was fraud. It's a fake. Check out what they said. It says Leonardo painted it in the late 15th century, 1495 to 1498, over 1400 years after they got Jesus' time. His true name is Yahweh. He was a so-called black man. It said it wasn't meant to be a photographic record. Yes, it was, because they did this to cause a deception. It says it's Renaissance art. What Renaissance means rebirth. That's when the Edomites came back into power and they brainwash and lie to everything about the Bible, how they look, the doctrines, all this. It says full of symbolism and emotion, not historical precision. It says, example, all the disciples are sitting on the same side of the table, which is an unrealistic but creates a powerful visual for storytelling. So they want to put this imagery in your mind. It says Yahweh Shah is depicted with European features, so-called white skin, because they the color red, long brown hair, and that's abomination for a man to have long hair. So this can't be the Messiah, which reflects European cultural norms, not so-called Middle Eastern reality. Middle Eastern is a new concept. This is the so-called Judeans. It was dark brown skin and dark skinned people. All right. But it reflects Edomite culture. Let's keep going. It says, two, art shapes perception. I'm going to read that again for you, Jake. Art shapes perception. What does this mean? It says, over time, popular art influences belief. Leonardo's painting became one of the most reproduced and recognized religious artworks in history. They even had that in I think my grandmother's house. She had that picture. And a lot of other, a lot of other people still got that in their house. It says, I'm going to read this again. It says, most reproduced and recognized religious artworks in history. It says, so many people began to associate it with the actual event. That's how you get influenced and indoctrinated and brainwashed without you knowing it, even though they know it's a painting. 3, it says the church endorsed art as a teaching tool. Man, it's heavy. It says the church, your Christian church, endorsed art as a teaching tool. It says in the Renaissance, most people were illiterate. Like you got people today, pretty much the same. So the Catholic Church used art to teach Bible stories visually. Man, that is so heavy. It says Leonardo's Last Supper was part of this strategy, emotional, dramatic, and easy to understand. Let's keep going. It says 4, cultural familiarity replaces accuracy. It says mainstream religion, especially in the West, which means Esau Edom, has often been more influenced by traditional and culture than by strict historical accuracy. So even though the paint isn't biblically or historically precise, it feels familiar and sacred to the generations of believers, which they'll be Edomites, right? So-called white people. They attach themselves to this because the imagery look like them. This is their culture. They actually embrace this lie because it empowers them, but it's not the truth. It's like it says lack of alternatives. There's no actual physical image of the Last Supper event. So imaginative recreations fill the gap. And Leonardo's version just happened to be the most famous and enduring because they intentionally did this so they can indoctrinate and brainwash you to see so-called white people as divine. Right? This is part of that great deception, that fog and that haze you've been in. Number 1, it says it is deceptive even if unattended. This was intentionally done. While artists like Leonardo da Vinci likely didn't intend to deceive, and as they line right here, they line. This was done on purpose. The long-term effect of repeatedly showing that God Jesus and his disciples as European-looking so-called white men has been confusing people into thinking these depictions are accurate. Do you hear this? You devils. And for Jake that be on the slow bus. It says reinforcing the Eurocentric view versions of Christianity. And that's what Jake is under. The witchcraft of plantation Christianity. It says reinforcing a Eurocentric version of Christianity where so-called white imagery is seen as divine, pure, and holy. Heavy. It says 2, portraying the so-called white race as divine. This is the core of your point, and yes, historically, European artists, which are Edomite artists, made religious figures look like themselves. Over centuries, this visual standard trained people, especially in the West, you so-called Americans and all the Edomites, other Edomite nations, to equate divinity with so-called whiteness. Do you hear this? This wasn't just artistic bias. It fed into colonialism, Salakia, white so-called supremacy, and the idea that Europe was God's chosen region. It says, in effect, it became a spiritual whitewashing of Middle Eastern, which that's a new term, African. I'm going to get into those terms in another lesson. That's all new speak. It says, number 3, check this out. Christianity originated in the so-called Middle East. Christianity, the real Christians are Israelites. They gave you the redefinition of this word Christian and the new speak of it, but the Christians are the Israelites. And this term Middle East is the new term as well. It says Jesus, I'm just reading it as is, was a brown-skinned Jew. That word Jew is new speak as well. All these errors in the English language. I'm going to read it again. Jesus, which his true name is Yahweh, was a brown-skinned so-called Jew from ancient Palestine, which would be Palestine is a new speak as well. They go back into the Philistines, which is modern day, as Israel, but it's going back into Israel. It says the apostles were Shemitic, not Semitic. This is a new speak, not European, not so-called white people. They was people of so-called color, brown-skinned people. The original church grew out of so-called African and Middle Eastern cultures, not Rome, not Europe, which they trying to say, Yet Renaissance art and later European religious traditions reimagined biblical figures in their own racial image, then exported that imagery through missions, colonizations, and religious education. You got to screenshot all this, which helped justify slavery, conquest, and racial hierarchy, all while presented it as holy. All while presented it as holy. Check this out. For the deeper issue, I'm gonna have to do a 2-part lesson on this because I gotta tie in some scriptures and some other history to this. It says the deeper issue: control of image, control of narrative. That's heavy. Who controls the image of God or divinity controls power. They control status and controls the identity in a society. When Yahweh is shown as so-called white, it subtly tells people of color that holiness doesn't look like them. It reinforces the idea that so-called white people are closer to so-called God, which is not just inaccurate, but spiritually abusive. Yeah, this is all you've been bewitched. You've been under a spell. You've been asleep. You've been in a coma. You've been dumbed down. You've been tricked. So many different words. And most of you jakes, that's outside of the truth. You still under these enchantments. It's when you wake up when you can finally see what's going on. This is a bewitchment on you. You've been under a spell, under an illusion. That's why Jake is the way they are. They completely lost sheeple that have to be guided. I'm going to have to do a part 2 because I got some more heavy hitter information to go into this to tie it all in together. Right? Hopefully this lesson has been edifying. Call halal Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachak, Quadash. Shalom.